A very good evening to everyone who's joined us for this online event, All Sisters and Brothers, Sustaining Hope with Refugees and Asylum Seekers, organised by the London Church's Refugee Fund with the Church Times. It's a huge privilege for me as chair of LCRF to welcome on your behalf our guest contributors this evening. Reverend Roxanne Liddell, a trustee of LCRF, is curate at St Mary's Church, Stoke Newington, here in London. Our keynote speaker, Fr Timothy Radcliffe, is a Dominican friar, writer, and former master of the Order of Preachers, whose books, preaching, and worldwide ministry have informed and shaped the lives of countless Christians across the globe, including many of us here this evening. Details of his latest book, Alive in God, are available on the Church Times website. Zrinka Bralo, Chief Executive of Migrants Organise, a community organising platform for migrants and refugees acting for justice, was herself a refugee from war-torn Bosnia and is hugely respected internationally for her tireless work upholding and championing the rights of refugees and migrants, including the sponsorship scheme that ensured sanctuary for 20,000 Syrians. The Reverend Dr. Andrew Prasad, a patron of LCRF, is moderator of Thames North Synod of the United Reformed Church, and as a former senior executive at the Council for World Mission, Andrew has extensive experience of visiting churches in multi-faith India and across the world, sitting where they sit, as he says, doing theology contextually with his sisters and brothers. Actor Alfred Enoch, also an LCRF patron, will perform a dramatic speech from Sir Thomas More, warning of the ills that befall a nation that refuses to help asylum seekers. From March the 31st, Alfred is starring with Fionn Whitehead, Joanna Lumley and Stephen Fry in the much acclaimed online production of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Throughout the evening, we will be displaying a live comment stream for your insights too, dear brothers and sisters. Please prefix your questions for the panel with the word question. And we also ask you please to exercise a little restraint in the number of comments you make during Fr Timothy's keynote address to help us all concentrate. Welcome, one and all. And now over to Roxanne.
Thank you, Chris. I invite you, my sisters and brothers, as we come together at this time to join our voices across the world and share in this opening prayer. So let us pray. As the sun begins to leave the sky and the cloak of night begins to fall, and as the Lord watches over the stranger in the land, we pray for all asylum seekers and refugees this eventide. For all having walked wearily through the wilderness of change and adversity this pandemic year, to find themselves on these shores. For those during the undulations of life who have lost those they love. For those unable to see or call or say loving words of reassurance to families far away. And for those whose journeys ended before they started. We pray for all our charities involved with supporting refugees and asylum seekers, and give thanks for all the selfless service given this past year. Lovingly, we also pray today for Reverend Helen Burnett, Vicar at Chal, who fought today for protesting against climate change. As our ears and hearts open, we pray for the London Church's Refugee Fund and our speaker, Fr Timothy Radcliffe, and all contributing today, inspiring us so we may continue to walk in Christ's way, challenging those who perpetrate injustice, extending love and comfort, standing with the marginalised and oppressed. So as mercy and grace on us all. We ask on this day when Mary accepted the invitation from God, and through the light which emboldens us to walk his way, our Saviour Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you very much, Roxanne. We began this evening with prayer because we try to begin all our meetings and events at the London Church's Refugee Hardship Fund this way, including our regular trustee and grants meetings, currently held via Zoom, but in more normal times around my kitchen table. The two objects of the fund, as set out in the Charity Commission website, are first, to provide small grants to organisations within the Greater London area that are meeting the welfare needs of destitute asylum seekers and refugees, and to relieve sickness and financial and other hardship amongst refugees and asylum seekers and their dependents. And secondly, to advance the education of the public in general about the issues relating to refugees and those seeking asylum. And that, in a nutshell, sums up what we hope and pray for will be achieved this evening. And given the latest news breaking from the Home Office, it would seem that such hopes and prayers are now more urgently needed than ever. Raising awareness, informing our faith and values, and sustaining hope with refugees and asylum seekers through focused practical action.
Wow! Welcome to our first ever video promoting the London Church's Refugee Fund, compiled by Martin, who with his fellow trustees undertake all the work of the fund voluntarily. LCRF was launched 13 years ago in Westminster Abbey to fill a gaping hole in refugee services by providing grants to frontline projects in London to support their work with destitute asylum seekers. 13 years later, and the need is as great as ever. But these words from a refugee from one of the projects we support make it all worthwhile. They write, "It is the coldest time of the year, and life rewards us with the warmth of those good-hearted people who make us happy with caring, practical gestures. In every human being," they write, "there is a piece of God, and it is reflected in action towards others."
Hello and good evening. My name is Rin Cabralo and I'm the Chief Executive of Migrants Organise, and we have been on the receiving end of the support of London Churches Refugee Fund for more than 10 years now. And I think around £13,000 that we've received, we distributed to those who needed the most. And I also want to thank you all for your prayers and your support and for bringing much needed empathy and compassion into the lives of people who have been essentially dehumanized, and we hear so much negative about them. Migrants Organise does a lot of campaigning. At the moment, we're working on a campaign for vaccines for all, for access to healthcare for all people equally. We're also encouraging people to register and vote and exercise their democratic rights. Many migrants can do so, but they don't know that they can. And half of our work is also providing direct advice and support for now more than 500 people in London. Many of them are currently in hotels, in temporary accommodation, and are struggling. They feel very, very isolated. We have successfully, in a lockdown, transitioned to many Zoom activities, 25 Zoom activities per week, where people come together. They write poetry, they learn English, they even published a book of poems for Christmas called Migrant Write. And it's all, we also run a mentoring program, which is all about keeping people connected and break the isolation, which is probably the worst thing that is happening to all of us right now. But for refugees and migrants, it's even worse. We're acting as a platform, which means that we try to provide spaces for people to speak out and to recover their dignity and to campaign and organize for fair immigration system that is based on principles of dignity, justice, welcome, and action. All the things that London Churches Refugee Fund stands for in their support for us and many other sister organizations. And because many of our members could not be here tonight, we're going to see a short film that was made for Netflix by American comedian Chelsea Handler when she came to visit us in 2017. And you will see in that film many of our members, some of them benefited from your support. And later on, I can give you updates on what has happened to every single one of them. It's mostly good news. And also when we have a panel discussion, I'm hoping to tell you a little bit more about what we can do together to make things better and reflect on some of the changes that have been announced yesterday. It looks like that stream was suspended for some people. I don't know if everyone else could see it, but I've got some messages that there's an issue with copyright. So unfortunately, if you have not been able to see some of our members, you can actually do that on YouTube. So I don't know if there was a problem, what the problem was. But I can tell you shortly that people who feature in that video, almost all of them got their refugee status because they had proper legal advice and proper support, and they're all gone to work, apart from one, Mariam, who's a lady from Somalia, and she's still waiting. I think it's been now 11 years that she's been stuck in the system. And we have finally found her a good solicitor, so we're hoping that that will move her case forward. But that's been a great challenge for many people, is to find good legal advice and also to get access to legal aid or free legal advice, because obviously people have had problems with making money, so they cannot afford to pay for expensive legal advice. And that access to justice is a real problem. So I'm not sure what we're going to do right now. we can continue, but I think it might be better if we just have a conversation, and perhaps we can share a link. Or if you just go to Migrants Organise website, which is migrantsorganize.org, you will be able to watch the video that we, unfortunately, as some of you may not have been able to see. It is available on our website, and it's available on YouTube. And it's just a nice way of seeing what people have to say. It's a sort of snapshot in time. And interestingly, that things have not developed for better. I mean, for these individuals have, but with people who are just arriving, are much tougher. And during the pandemic, things have got much worse. Hello. Unfortunately, we are not able to see the video. You can watch it on migrantsorganize.org website, and it's also available on YouTube. But in short summary, it was a nice way of presenting stories of 5 of our members. One is a street kid from Nepal, who is now a social worker. Tiru, who is a dancer from Sri Lanka, who is now teaching and doing classes with older people, teaching them to do Bollywood dancing. Aiden, who's Eritrean, and she has she's now working for a charity in Oxford. And Bashar, who's from Syria, who came here with his 2 daughters, one of them severely ill, has now also been granted refugee status, and he's working in a primary school. Sadly, only Mariam, a lady who is a refugee from Somalia, is still in the system and still struggling for 11 years. And we're hoping that now, with some good legal advice and support, she will also be granted a full refugee status soon. But this is the story of many people who get stuck, and as soon as they're released, they flourish and they contribute. And it's such a waste of human potential and life and capacity to contribute. So hopefully you can watch that, and then we can expand in our discussion on the issues that people are experiencing right now, and how these new changes might impact on future arrivals.
Hello, I'm Timothy Radcliffe. I'm a Dominican friar and I'm a Catholic priest, and I could watch the video and it was wonderful. So I hope you'll be catching up with it. I feel immensely honoured to share some thoughts with you this evening, but I'd better start with a confession. When Chris asked me to talk to you this evening, my initial reaction was to say no. I'm afraid I got no experience of working with refugees in this country at all. But Chris insisted, and so I'll have a go. It reminds me of once I was asked by a Catholic bishop, to give a talk on what it means to be a bishop. And I said to my Dominican brothers, but I don't know what to say. I've never been a bishop. And one of my brethren said to me, don't worry, Timothy, ignorance has never stopped you talking in the past. And so it won't tonight. And you can blame Chris. So, all sisters and brothers, sustaining hope with refugees and asylum seekers. I want to focus on the second part, hope. How do we sustain each other in hope as guests and hosts and sisters and brothers? A friend of mine, Sarah Tether, she's the director of the Jesuit Refugee Service. Sarah told me that what gives her hope is the refugees themselves. And I can tell you that's my experience too. After ISIS invaded the northern plains of Iraq, the plains of Nineveh, hundreds of thousands of Christians, Muslims, Yazidis fled to Kurdistan. And they included my Dominican brothers and sisters. And I went to visit them in order to give them hope. How arrogant I was. They were the ones who gave me hope. You see, the refugees and asylum seekers who finally make it to our shores mostly have a courage and a resilience which exceed anything that I could imagine. To set out on such a journey, enduring danger, trial, suffering, that expresses a brave hope, which I can only admire. But often it's when they arrive here in our lands that the challenges begin and it becomes difficult to hope. And it's become much tougher recently. The deliberate creation of a hostile environment, destitution often imposed, forced detention, endless waiting, never knowing when it's going to end, forbidden to work, forbidden to study, utter insecurity, and the impossibility of renting accommodation. And now there is a new threat of being sent far away while your claim is being processed. Now, all of this looks as if it's actually designed to make people despair. One of the symptoms of that despair is when time disintegrates. The hope is to live in the present moment, confident of a future. But many refugees and asylum seekers experience the disintegration of time. During this pandemic, we've all experienced that to some extent. When will it end? When will I once again be able to see the people I love and hug them and kiss them? Will we ever be able to have meals together again? Is it really a year since it started? Sometimes it feels like 3 years, sometimes just like 3 months. So time goes all haywire. So imagine the radical dislocation of time for someone seeking sanctuary here. Time drags by and it rushes. Anna Rowland said, refugees talk about their sense of enforced idleness, the time it takes to get appeals heard, wasting their skills and talents as they endure lengthy time over years rather than months, creating a sense of degrading time, that you lack value, and slowly you lose the skills which are unused. Time falls apart. So how can our sense of time be once again lit up by hope? In the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, hope is discovered in encounter with God and with other people. When there is true encounter, when you really meet somebody, then the present is disclosed in the future. And our lives aren't just one day after another. You know how we remember when we first met the people that we love, and we live in anticipation of the next encounter. Then time becomes hope-filled. But many of our brothers and sisters seeking acceptance here, a welcome, a homeland, have encounters that crush them. Encounters with British bureaucracy that deaden time, rushed meetings, perhaps with inadequate interpreters. No one listens, it seems. Life is going nowhere. Now today, Christians celebrate the ultimate hopeful encounter, the Annunciation. The Archangel Gabriel bursts into the room of the young Mary, not wearing a mask even, ignoring all COVID restrictions, and announces the birth of a child. That's what hope looks like. It's a meeting pregnant with the future. But let us go back to an earlier encounter of Abraham and Sarah with unexpected strangers. You can read it in Genesis chapter 18. So Abraham is sitting at the door of his tent in the midday heat. Time has stopped. Nothing is happening. And in fact, nothing seems to be happening to Abraham and Sarah. The promised child doesn't seem to be on the way. It looks as if it's too late for Sarah anyway, she's too old. And then Abraham sees 3 strangers and he welcomes them. And they say to him, Sarah, your wife, will have a child. So once again, time picks up its feet and is filled with hope. How can we relive that encounter with strangers today, particularly the strangers who come to our shores? How do we receive them as bringing good news for us? Notice it begins with Abraham seeing the strangers. Do we really see the people who come to our land? And do we let ourselves be seen by them? Michael Chen, writing about Hispanic refugees in the United States, said that the worst of all things was whether targeted by sexual violence at work, cut off from prenatal care, migrant women are at the same time exploited and invisible. They're seen as sexual objects or cheap labor, but they themselves are invisible. Another friend of mine, an American Dominican, went to a photographic exhibition in Lima in Peru. And he saw there the photograph of a bemused young kid, a street kid. And underneath the photograph, it said, "Saben que existo, pero no me ven." They know that I exist, but they don't see me. They know I exist as a statistic, an object, a nuisance. But they don't see me, a fellow human being. When Jesus dined with Simon the Pharisee, a woman, a local woman, probably a prostitute, burst into the room and wept and washed his feet with her tears. And Simon the Pharisee was horrified Doesn't he see who this awful woman is, this disgusting prostitute? But Jesus says to him, do you see her? Do you see this woman? He said, I entered your house and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. The Pharisee sees a nuisance. Jesus sees a sister. It all begins with learning to see the human face, the complexity, vulnerability, the humanity that's written all over another person's faith, if only you could see it. I experienced this very powerfully one day in Algeria a few years ago. I've been invited by the local church to come and visit the whole country and think about the future of the church in Algeria. And a Dominican bishop of Oran, one of my brothers, drove me to the south of the country in his small, rather battered old car. Because of civil disturbance, we couldn't fly there. And when we were near the north of the Sahara, we got caught up in the trouble. The car immediately in front of us was captured, and the people were taken hostage. We knew that if we were captured, we might not be taken hostage. It might be the end. And I shall never forget the face of a young man who hung over the car in front of the windscreen with a stone the size of a football. I thought at any moment he could throw it and we would be finished. I tried to catch his eyes, and I thought, if only he can see me, he'd see another human being. He might forgive his ancient uncle. And as I looked at his face, I saw that beneath all the hatred, there was fear. This is a young kid. He was probably wondering how he got caught up in this violence. Where would it all lead? And then underneath the fear, I glimpsed for just a moment a young man who his mother loved, whom I could love. I saw my brother. There's a hostel in the red light district in Amsterdam. And one day a prostitute came in looking for some help. And she said to the woman who received her, "Oh, you must be a Christian." And the woman said, "How do you know?" And she said, "Because you looked me in the eyes." For the Jesuit Refugee Service, Sarah tells me that the blessed encounter is often around the table, sharing a meal, human beings with each other, looking at each other face to face, with faces unveiled. And then when Abraham sees the strangers, he runs towards them. He ran from the tent, it says, and met them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourself under the tree. My Lord." How often do we say that to the people who come to us? There's a wonderful Inuit word, and please forgive my bad pronunciation. I'm not very good at Inuit. Itso arpotik. It means that feeling of excitement when somebody comes to visit you. You're filled with anticipation. You run outside to see whether they've come. Now, Abraham was not expecting them. But when they come, he's filled with excitement, with joy. There must be a feast. Let's party. And he offers them gifts because they are gifts for him. The hope is to see that those who come to us are gifts, and we may be gifts for them too. The first time that I ever went to Iraq was in the time of Saddam Hussein. There was very little to eat because of the sanctions imposed, above all, by Britain and the United States. My Dominican sisters wanted to make me the traditional cake of welcome, but there weren't any ingredients. So they did something very beautiful. They danced the making of the cake. They had nothing to give, so they made a gift out of nothing. Many of the sisters and brothers who have come to our shores have experienced a terrible transformation. They've been transformed into commodities, to be trafficked, to be marketed, perhaps in the slave markets in Libya, or by traffickers charging them to cross the Mediterranean or the Channel to come to us. Human beings are made into objects to be sold, to make money out of them. Think of the 39 Vietnamese refugees who died in a refrigerated truck discovered in an Essex car park. They were registered as biscuits and cookies. It was a sort of anti-Eucharist. Human beings were made into biscuits. Migrants were marketed. And this is the exact opposite of what Jesus did on the night before he died. He'd been sold for 30 shekels. Judas had turned him into a commodity to make money, but he made himself into a gift for us. This is my body given for you. This is my blood poured out for you. If our eyes are open, we'll see that those who come to us are gifts that we should welcome with celebration, like Abraham. One of the ways that we celebrate them as gifts is by acknowledging the skills that they bring, which we need. Nothing is more creative of despair than the denial of the right to do any work while they're waiting. Their human agency is denied. They are made into objects, reduced to passivity. The traffickers have already made them into objects instead of gifts. And often the way that we forbid them to work does the same thing all over again. In Kurdistan, my Dominican brothers and sisters founded refugee centers for people fleeing from Iraq. Christians, Muslims, Yazidis. And these refugee centers were built by the refugees themselves because they were creative, intelligent people. They were engineers, constructors, architects. And we established medical centers for the refugees, which were manned by the refugees, because the refugees were doctors and nurses, people we should delight to have. And one of the gifts that the people coming to our shores bring is their faith. Many of them are Muslims and Christians. This is a gift to our secular society. We must not be afraid. Another profound expression of hope is study. Study is much more than preparing yourself for a job. It forms us as people who try to make sense of who we are and what we're living, our sorrow and our joy. Jonathan Sacks, that great man, former chief rabbi who died recently, he said, human beings are meaning-seeking animals. It belongs to our humanity to try to make sense of our lives through study. Václav Havel, who's a playwright, former president of the Czech Republic, he said, hope is not the conviction that everything will turn out well. It's the hope that it will all make sense, that our sorrows and joys will have some meaning, which we will ultimately discover face to face with God. As St. Paul said, for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we shall see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I shall see fully, even as I am known. Every school is a sign of hope. In the schools run by our sisters in Iraq, Christians and Muslims sit side by side. They become friends. They form dreams together. Maybe the dream of a new, tolerant, peace-filled Iraq. I visited the city of Homs in Syria not long ago. In the middle of the desolation of this city, these ruins, I found a school. It was where a Jesuit, Frans van der Lucht, who used to teach there, had been murdered because he refused to leave. And in the school, I found an old Jesuit from Egypt still teaching, a sign of hope in the midst of ruins. Hopes are fertile. And today we remember the meeting of Mary and Gabriel, which led to the birth of Jesus. And we think back to that earlier encounter of Abraham and Sarah with the strangers, leading to the birth of their son Isaac. Fertility. Fertility is the fruit of difference. Difference brings new life, just as every one of us is the fruit of the glorious difference between women and men. Our society tends to be afraid of difference, which is why it's often tempted by despair. On the web, we're in constant communication with people from all over the globe. But because of the algorithms of Facebook and Google, they're usually with people like ourselves, people who belong to our little mental bubbles, our little echo chambers. We flee what Sigmund Bauer calls risk-ridden complexity into the shelter of uniformity. But when we see those who come to us from afar, from Syria and Iraq and Somalia and Eritrea, from all over the world, when we see them in their wonderful difference, we know that their presence among us will be fertile. They can bring life to tired old Europe, where all the children of immigrants, ultimately, immigration refreshes us and makes us new. But before I conclude, in just a very short moment, we must acknowledge something. That this beautiful reciprocity that many of us can see with strangers, with refugees and asylum seekers, is not seen by everybody. Many of our own citizens in this country are afraid. They feel themselves to be homeless and helpless. All over Europe, we see a rising resistance to strangers, populist movements in every country, a rising xenophobia. In the United Kingdom, 75% of people think that immigration is too high. Pope Francis begs us to build bridges, but all over the place we see walls going up. Christianity means open doors, homes that welcome. But many of the people who resist immigration do not have homes of their own, either literally because they can't afford to buy homes, they can't even afford perhaps to rent them. Increasingly, young people live with their parents because they can't get a home of their own. Often their homes themselves are filled with pain and suffering because of divorce and separation. And if you don't belong, it's hard to welcome others. So let us remember them. Hope is inseparable. So let us seek to sustain the hope of those who seek sanctuary with us from abroad. Let us welcome them. Let us accept their gifts. May they bring us new life, new fertility. But also let us remember those in our own country who feel helpless and homeless. They need hope too. None of us can do everything. Many of you pour out your lives generously in welcoming strangers who come to our shores. You give everything you can to them. All of us, all that any of us can do is get up in the morning, see what there is to do that day and do it. Our small deed may seem not much, but we trust in the Lord of the harvest, who will bring from it fruit that we cannot imagine. But don't let's forget those other workers in other vineyards who work with people who are suffering from despair, the homeless of our own country, because hope is inseparable. We need hope for all. Thank you very much.
I'm sure our participants and our sisters and brothers who are watching us would like to join me in thanking Father Timothy for the profound presentation, sharing personal experience, wisdom, theological and biblical insights. Among many important aspects of sustaining hope, I would highlight only two. Encounter of differences which create sustaining hope is a sound theological foundation. The opportunity for guests to study and to share skills and gifts are practical signs of hope. Encounter of differences is the key to release love, grace, and creative energy. Encounters are between the divine and the human, between woman and man, between people of different religious, ethnicity, nationality, cultures, or political views. We are impoverished without encounters. Something new is created, including the birth of a child by encounter. Our physical and mental barriers and our fears dissolve as we find out that the stranger is our neighbor, our sister, brother, or fellow human being who has similar needs, fears, and gifts as we do. Encounter bestows blessing upon both host and guest on whichever side of the border we find ourselves. Richard Rohr, a Franciscan, speaks about on the edge of the inside, a tent of meeting outside the camp. But the outside tents are fewer and less desirable because they are risky. Center of the camp is safe, untouched by the other. Walter Brueggemann describes it as totalism of the system that wants to silence, banish, or eliminate every prophetic intrusion. So the meeting point has to be outside the camp, where the people can think the unthinkable and imagine the unimaginable. Asylum seekers who risk their lives to come to our shores are already winners, but they lose hope and courage due to British bureaucracy, being treated as a case number, the talents and skills laid waste, and the time dislocated. We do need some light in our nation. How can you invite a guest to your home when you have no home? You go through the same bureaucratic hurdles for social benefits, and you are known by a referral number. Further, may I add, deep-seated racism in our society. The generations of Black and minority ethnic people are not just marginalized, but they don't feel a belonging to this nation in which they were born. Ironically, the marginalized at home and the asylum seekers identify with one another in many ways. They generate sustaining hope and have immense potential to contribute to wider society. Father Timothy, your biblical insights point to practical actions, seeking an opportunity to the guests to study and to share gifts and skills for the greater good is definitely a sign of hope. You call for a small effort by many. Once put into the hands of the Lord of harvest, these will bear fruits beyond our imagination. And may I add, the season of Lent surely reminds us that death and resurrection of our Savior is the final act of life winning over death. So be it. Once again, Father, I thank you. And I now invite our participants, those who are joining us through comments, please put your comments in, and also questions. You got better make a question mark for us to easily identify. Panel is with us, and I will try to direct these questions to them for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you. I have picked a few questions, and we all can see in comments. I think, Martin, I picked up a question in a Jeremy Harding's writing in 2020, and it's about the richer nations where people think generosity is wise, and how the churches can help change the views. The question probably goes to Father Timothy, if you're happy to make a response, but others are welcome.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think what's transformative for most people is simply experience. If you go abroad and see people whom you've thought of as them, and you sit with them and receive their hospitality, then you no longer see them as them, you see them as part of us. I think the big problem is that we've drawn, as St. Teresa of Calcutta says, we've drawn the circle of the family too tight. Whereas when you're with people, suddenly you don't see them as threats anymore. So I would say get abroad. What was transformative of my life, well, a little bit anyway, is actually just going to visit people in refugee camps in Rwanda, in Burundi, Angola, going to places like AIDS hospitals in Honduras, and not discovering victims, but discovering brothers and sisters. So I don't think you can force people into generosity. You can't morally pressurize them by making them feel guilty. But what you can do, I hope, is a little bit what I've experienced, is just the experience of being with people. And then you realize that of course you want to share, because you know how much you will receive. That if you share only a little bit, you will receive vastly more.
Thank you. I got another question. Martin is directing a question to Rinka. What is your reaction to Priti Patel's announcement yesterday? Well, you can choose to answer in full or brief, but others are welcome to speak.
What can I say? I'm afraid I wasn't surprised, because Priti Patel and the previous Home Secretaries have been implementing the hostile environment immigration policy, so this is part of the same parcel. I was not surprised by this insistence on what they call illegal routes, because that's been in practice now for many years. That is how I was refused asylum in 1994. So there are always these attempts to criminalize ways in, or to find faults with what people are doing. But actually there is the Article 31 of the Geneva Convention, the Refugee Convention from 1951, stipulates that people have to leave through unusual routes, that we cannot apply for passports, we're running away from dangers, and we have to find ways to survive, and we will. And I think we also need to be reminded that the reason why people are forced into hands of traffickers is because there are no any other routes. We have registered at community sponsors 3 years ago, but we were able to resettle only one family, because that is a very complicated, time-consuming and resource-consuming process. So it is the governments, Western governments, who have created a situation which forces people into these, unsafe situations, and the government is going to try to make these routes more punishable for those who are using people and charging them. But it is not, I'm afraid, it's not a solution for the problem that we're facing, which is global. At the moment, there are 26 million refugees in the world. And then the amount of money that's being spent, our money that's being spent on enforcement, I was just reading the latest statistics, 4.3 million pounds was spent just between October and December on removing 322 people. That is £13,500 per person to chart a private flight. Now, I'm sure we would find better ways of using those resources, but somehow enforcement and hostility is a priority. So I think we all have a role to play, and this new proposal is open for consultation. I have registered on the platform today to give my views. And as I was registering, there were 2,800 other people on the same platform. So we all have a voice, and we all have a role to play, whether you choose to write to your MP or support people publicly or on social media or directly. And I think one of the challenges for us is that these negative narratives are out there. But I'm actually very optimistic, because I tend to meet lots of people like you who do good work. And here we are today celebrating that good work. But normally, good people, especially in faith communities, who are on the grassroots in their communities, and we've seen that with mutual aid groups, good people tend to do good work quietly. And so we get this skewed picture out there that everybody is of the same negative opinion about refugees and migrants. But that is not true. There are many, many people out there who are very understanding, very compassionate, very supportive. It's just that they don't really get to have a say and will not fight for those spaces to be shouting about it, because it is seen as not something that people do. So people tend to be modest about their good work.
Thank you, Rinka. Another question, quite interesting, is why is tough on refugees seen as a vote winner, or at best neutral? Is it true? And if so, how can be combated I wonder whether Chris would like to take this question.
Thank you, Andrew. I think it's because there is an unfortunate trait in human nature, and our faith tells us this, that there is a bias, a shadow in all of us, which, if appealed to, we find it difficult sometimes not to respond. And I think this is why I think actually that having some deep fundamental faith that is deeper than ideology in who we are and what makes us tick, where we've come from and why we're here, is fundamental. And we've seen that time and again, if you appeal to the worst of human nature, it sort of itches away under our skin, and it appeals to all that's worst in us, into a kind of, we get fearful and isolationism. You start telling the narratives of racialism and eugenics. And for some reason, well, we would say it's because, basically going right back to the fall, all of us have, unless we have some deep reason for resisting it, we find it compellingly attractive, even though it's terrible. And I think that what Christianity and the other great faiths provide is a deep meta narrative that we are all one race. We are all equally dignified before God. We are all loved by him, and that we are all, in the end, our brothers and our sisters' keeper. And I think this is why it's absolutely vital that we keep alive these deep narratives, because when they're told, when these stories are told, when we appeal to what's best in people, then that flame lights up and they hear it. But if we allow the narrative, just one final thing, I do want to say this, that we must not underestimate the extent to which these deep negative narratives run. They were running throughout the 20th century in the eugenicists and the racialists, and people at top scientific academies were talking about the degeneration of their race if we allowed migrants to come in. And Marie Le Pen kept on her desk a novel which was depicting terribly a totally false picture of the vice that she saw immigrants would bring into France and elsewhere. And some of, for instance, of Donald Trump's top advisors, when the Syrians, refugees, fled from Syria and wanted to go to America, he said, this is an example precisely of what that book was talking about. So we must not underestimate the way these narratives reach into the very depths of our government, and they need to be resisted with the deep narratives that we tell from our faith communities about goodness, love, brotherhood, sisterhood, and the need to love our neighbor as ourselves, because we're all of equal dignity in God's sight.
Thank you, Chris.
I just add something, Andrew.
Sure.
And I think that in every society you find fear. Every society has undercurrents of fear. And in some ways, the more unequal a society gets, the less security people have about the future, the more they're likely to be motivated, touched by fear. And of course, this is particularly the case at the moment with the pandemic, where everybody's future is so unsure. And one way that you cope with fear is by projecting that fear on someone or some group of people. You say, that's what I'm afraid of. If we get rid of them, it will all be all right. This is what the French philosopher René Girard calls the scapegoat mechanism. Find a scapegoat, cast them out, and it will all be well. And so much of our politics is a politics of fear. It stirs up fear, provokes fear. And that means that scapegoats are sought. But of course, once they get rid of them, you have to find another one, because the profound causes of fear still remain. And because we know, as the gospel says, the opposite of fear is love.
Thank you, Timothy. We got just about three minutes left. I just raised the last question. We are all strangers on earth. What can we do to encourage our politicians and neighbors without faith? Understand this. People of faith and those who are people of no faith, there's a confusion how we see them. But I think the question is simpler, that how can we encourage them? Who wants to take it?
Zrinka, I wonder if you want to have a go at this.
So in our work, we work very, very in our communities in deep roots. We don't say grassroots, we say deep roots. And it always starts with conversation. And it always is about building trust and not judging people, but sharing our experiences and our stories. And that's how we make sense of the world. And building up from that local level to regional to national, joining it up together, and very importantly, connecting individual struggles into bigger causes and addressing systemic problems, which can be scary. But we will not change the situation that we're in if we just keep, rescuing babies out of the water. We need to go up the stream and see who's throwing babies into the water and stop that. So that's what we're doing. We spent 2 years listening to what migrants and refugees who are not one unified group want together, and we pulled it together in what we call Fair Immigration Reform Movement Charter, and following tradition from the Chartist movement. And we're now asking people to sign up to that as a set of values, set of principles based on justice, dignity, action, and welcome. And then we're going to plan to work together. So it is for us and allies, not yet for politicians, but it describes not only what is wrong with the system, but what we can do to fix it. So if we can imagine a better system, fairer system, then what can be conceived can be delivered, to stay in the theme of today. And I'm absolutely convinced and energized that we can do that, because everything around us is man-made. So we also have to remember that we can remake it and we can make it better. So none of this is, obviously pandemic is slightly out of our control, but many other things in our society, including immigration system and how we treat people, is not, and we can change that. So, and here we are talking about how we can change that and how we can imagine it. I will be seeing you soon again to conspire to change this and to have these conversations, because you are actually the people who have the power. Immigrants cannot vote, but most of you can. And that is your magic power that you have and, will exercise hopefully for the better.
If I could just come in.
I thank the party. I'll come back to you. We are just about to finish. The time is over. I want to thank participants for raising good questions and the panel for making contribution. Last thing, Chris, and then Chris takes over from here.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Can you leave others on the screen? I find it easier to talk to them. I just wanted to add, or talk with them. I also wanted to add that so much of it is built on falsehood. The facts are that we are all migrants, just as we're all strangers. As Timothy said, we are all descended from migrants. I am. My mother came across from Canada, was then abandoned at the age of 7. And migration and movement is at the heart of creation. That the animals do it, the species do it. Trees are climbing their way up the Himalayas, but butterflies are moving across the world trying to find better places to live as the climate changes. And time and again, and it's just not true that, for instance, when different species arrive in a new place, that they dominate or damage it. It's just the opposite is true. So often they, plants and animals, they create flourishing. And we have to keep getting the facts about human movement, about being of one race, about all originating and all being related. There's no such thing as different races. Those are the facts. And secondly, that's the broad thing. I'd recommend one particular book by Sonia Shah called The Next Great Migration, and also a book called Bloody Foreigners, which reveals the absolute sheer extent of the massive contribution to all the things that we think are British have been made by people who've come to us from overseas. So that's absolutely vital. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum is the sheer compassion and love. We have to be open, and we have to find words and narratives that open people's hearts and convert them, not to Christianity or Islam or Judaism, but give them hearts of flesh. So suddenly they are moved with compassion for their brothers and sisters whom they encounter. So the method, the macro and the micro, vital.
Chris, it's back to you.
It's back to me. Thank you very much. So, brothers and sisters, in a few moments, the actor Alfred Enoch will perform a dramatic reading from Sir Thomas More for us. The words disturbingly current as our nation risks turning away those seeking asylum in this land today. I want to thank everyone for being with us this evening, and to all our contributors to this evening's event, to Eleanor Caddy and all at the Church Times for their support in partnering this event. And if there are parts of the evening that you've missed, the Church Times have recorded everything, and it will be available through their website and also later through the London Churches Refugee Fund website. So may God bless and keep us all, and especially our sisters and brothers in peril on the sea this night. God bless and keep them, and turn our hearts to flesh as we strive to help them with passion and skill and wisdom. And now I invite you to stay tuned for Alfred Enoch.
I think what we do is really important. The Christian church has to be united, and it can't be united if it doesn't know what's going on. The range of stories we cover is universal. The approach we have is comprehensive.
We're looking to help people, with ministry, mission. We also publish positive, constructive content, which aims to help the church be a better church, and that's what we care about.
But we also look at things incredibly in depth. We take a lot of time with our stories, make sure that they're accurate, that they're very detailed, and the reader is not left asking questions at the end.
It enlightens bits of the world that don't get reported elsewhere.
I think what's really important about the Church Times is it's independent. We're not affiliated to any other organisation, so we're really free in what we can write.
If the church screws up, then we report it. If the church does something fantastic, then we report it. We deliberately don't have our own agenda.
One of my favourite things about the Church Times is our book reviews. I think it's really important because it points clergy and really interested lay people to what some of the latest theology is, academic theology, but also books about spirituality, things like prayer, and also social issues.
Subscribers can access 150 years of past issues through the Church Times' own website, which is linked to the UK Press Online site, and they can look at any of the issues since 1863 page by page.
So I really enjoy doing a cartoon for the Church Times when I've got a really strong idea and I know that it's something that the readers will enjoy.
A huge part of the service we provide the church is advertising jobs specifically for clergy, but also for musicians, teachers, youth workers and so on.
The Church Times runs the Festival of Preaching, which is a chance for clergy and readers and anyone else who's interested to really explore the craft of preaching. The Festival of Faith and Literature is a literary festival with a theological slant, at which questions of faith and theology are explored. The Church Times Cricket Cup has been going since 1951. When they put on their cricket whites, the different traditions and the things that might divide them become much less significant, and it's definitely plays some role in helping forge Christian unity. The Church Times also runs the Green Awards together with the Church of England's Shrinking the Footprint campaign, It's a way to celebrate those churches that are leading the way in being good stewards of the environment.
One of the things that we do is start a dialogue between various groups in the church and really try and represent all views.
You ought to be able to read the Church Times and come out at the end of it more excited about what your Christian life is like.
The podcast was set up almost a year ago, and really the idea was to be a place where we could talk about the background of stories, how we came upon stories, provide some analysis of what's going on in the church and the wider world.
The Church Times is available on old-fashioned bits of paper. It's available on your phone, your computer, your tablet. There's an app. We make it as accessible as we possibly can. We're always looking for more subscribers, and if anybody wants to, it's terribly easy. All they have to do is go to the website, or they can even phone up.
Hello, my name is Alfred Enoch. I'm an actor and the latest patron of the London Church's Refugee Fund. It's a real privilege to be involved with a charity that works so hard to make a direct and tangible difference in the lives of refugees here in the UK. It really is vital work, and it's underpinned by the recognition that although we may be divided by language, culture, ethnicity, nationality, we are all, at the bottom of it all, brothers and sisters. So I would like to share with you now a passage that makes this very point. It's from an Elizabethan play called Sir Thomas More, and this passage has been attributed to Shakespeare. Grant them removed, and grant that this your noise hath chid down all the majesty of England. Imagine that you see the wretched strangers, their babies at their backs and their poor luggage, plodding to the ports and coasts for transportation, and that you sit as kings in your desires, authority quite silent by your brawl, and you in ruff of your opinions clothed. What had you got?